Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll give an overview of my digital implementation of the tabletop board wargame Phantom Fury. This is actually the first video I've made discussing any of my coding projects other than a brief clip showing a terrain editor that I've been working on, but that earlier video didn't really have any discussion, so I'm counting this one as the first. This being my first foray into content creation of the sort, hopefully I won't screw things up too badly. I won't go into too much technical detail on the code, as this isn't a coding tutorial video and I'm not really qualified to tutor anyone in that regard anyway. But hopefully this video will stimulate further discussion on the subject of coding tabletop-style war or strategy games. I also have a small blog on Board Game Geek called Digital Abyss, where I discuss this and other projects. I'll put a link in the video description to my blog. I'll also put links to any other web pages that I mentioned in this video. And to save you too much torture, I'll put segment timestamps in the video description so you can skip ahead to the next section if I'm blathering too much. So about me, I started wargaming in, I think, 1978 or 1979. I learned the rudiments of the basic programming language in 1982, and I made a few brief attempts at coding games, but I gave up way too easily. I started learning C++ in 1998 or thereabouts, but again, only made a few abortive attempts at game programming over the years, which was a shame. In short, I've squandered much of my life. Hopefully you won't. I would describe myself as sort of a cowboy coder, if that term is still in use. The basic idea is that I tend to do far too much design in the code editor itself instead of thinking things through in advance. It's the antithesis of the adage, measure twice, cut once. And it's a terrible idea. But I'm impulsive and I need the immediate dopamine hits you get from typing a few lines of code, hitting build, and then watching your creation come to life. Occasionally, I'll write out design notes or UML diagrams before coding, but usually I'll only do this for a small piece of a project. And unfortunately, writing out fully fleshed out design overviews before starting coding is something I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do, even though it would be advisable. So Phantom Fury, the game, it's a tabletop board war game. It covers the opening hours of the Second Battle of Fallujah, Iraq in November 2004. It focuses on the fighting in the southeast corner of Fallujah, fighting by the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, and supporting U.S. Army and Iraqi Army forces. Of course, that being the reconstituted Iraqi Army. It's a solitaire game by design, strictly solitaire. You couldn't play a two-player even if you wanted to. It's designed by Laurent Clozier. I think he is a French Army officer or maybe a retired French Army officer. It's published by Nuts Publishing, which is a French publishing company. My digital implementation application seeks to implement full rules enforcement of the game, meaning coding the game according to the rules as written. I've contemplated adding some options not found in the rules as written, but I'll probably hold off for this project because it's a fairly tight design and it really doesn't, I wouldn't say it really needs anything else. On Board Game Geek, there's a lot of praise for the design of Phantom Fury, but some commenters or reviewers question its replayability. Once you learn the tactics of the game, it becomes somewhat rote, according to a lot of the commenters. You know, there may be some merit in this, and I think that the utility of a digital implementation is that it greatly reduces the amount of administrative overhead, you know, setting up the game, randomizing the various chit pools, drawing from chit pools, re-randomizing the chit pools. And by automating all of this stuff, it allows you to play the game many more times before you might become tired of it. So if you were to buy the tabletop version and maybe play it 3, 4, or 5 times before moving on to the next thing, With a digital implementation, who knows, maybe you would play it 10 times or 15 times. I won't do it in this video, but maybe in a future video, once I've gotten the application to a stable state, I will show you exactly how quickly you could blitz through a game if you really wanted to. Not to say that that is a desirable or advisable way of playing the game, but it's fun to see just how quickly you can play it if you really if you really wanted to. In this video, I'll assume your basic familiarity with the Phantom Fury rules, so I'm certainly not going to make this a tutorial on the game itself. In the game, I have used, in my implementation, I should say, I've used the artwork from both of the Vassal modules. There are actually 2 editions of Phantom Fury. The second edition came out, I think, in 2024. I used the map image and possibly some of the other counter images from the Vassal module for the first edition, and I think most of the counter images and other playing piece images I took from the Vassal module for the second edition. In any event, I think my activities are protected by the fair use doctrine in U.S. copyright law. That doctrine is codified in Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 107. I make no claim of ownership of the copyright to the elements of any of the artwork taken from the Vassal modules, and I likewise assert no ownership over the box cover image, which is also used in the application. I have reached out to the publisher, Nuts Publishing, to inform them of this project, but I haven't heard back from them. I also reached out to the designer, Laurent Closier. I haven't heard back from him. Obviously, therefore, neither Mr. Closier nor Nuts Publishing has approved of my use of any of their copyrighted materials, and it's also should be obvious that they've neither commissioned this project nor participated in it nor supervised the design or coding of the application, etc., etc. So everything you're about to see is entirely my fault. In making this project, and in fact, in all of the projects that I've documented on my BGG blog, I've used the C++ programming language and the Qt application framework. Here's the home page for Qt. I'll just quote from what it says here. The Qt framework contains a comprehensive set of highly intuitive and modularized C++ library classes and is loaded with APIs to simplify your application development. Qt produces highly readable, easily maintainable, and reusable code with high runtime performance and small footprint, and it's cross-platform. I would add that at least the community version of Qt is free to download and use, and I believe you can make your projects public. They have to be open sourced under the community version license, so you can't use them commercially, but instead, I believe you have to make your project open source. In particular, I've relied heavily on the Qt graphics view framework. I guess I'll just read this too. Graphics View provides a surface for managing and interacting with a large number of custom-made 2D graphical items and a view widget for visualizing the items with support for zooming and rotation. The framework includes an event propagation architecture that allows precise, double precision interaction capabilities for the items on the scene. Items can handle key events, mouse press, move, release, and double-click events, and they can also track mouse movement. I can vouch for all of that. Graphics View uses a BSP, aka binary space partitioning tree, to provide very fast item discovery, and as a result of this, it can visualize large scenes in real time, even with millions of items. I think that, a lot of people who might want to digitize board war games, your first thought might be to use something like Unity or Godot. The Qt Graphics View framework actually works fairly well once you get the basic hang of it, and of course, assuming you know C++. But once you get the hang of it, you can actually get a game map image up and counter images up and can move them around. I mean, you could probably do that in 10 or 15 minutes. Of course, there'll be no functionality there, but not even vassal type functionality, but I'd say it's fairly well suited to 2D board war games. You know, if you don't really care about flashy graphics or certainly not 3D graphics, you know, there's a lot of built-in functionality that will save you time. So it's worth considering if you are contemplating doing your own digitization projects. Just to give you a brief overview of the graphics view architecture, there are three basic classes. There's QGraphics Scene, which is a 2D canvas for rendering in a variety of ways. There's QGraphics Item, which is the base class for graphical items that are placed on the QGraphics scene. So that would be, among other things, unit counters and other playing pieces. And then there's QGraphics View, which is a widget. Widget is Qt's term for window. QGraphics View is a widget with a scrollable, transformable viewport through which the graphics scene and QGraphics items are visualized. Normally, you would create custom subclasses, but Qt has a number of built-in QGraphics item subclasses for common simple tasks like QGraphics item, QGraphics rect item, QGraphics ellipse item. So if you only need to do some fairly simple geometric shape rendering, you could use those built-in classes. But generally speaking, you're going to be wanting to subclass from the major classes I outlined earlier. So my objective for the Phantom Fury digital implementation project is to create a functional prototype, not a finished product. In other words, an application that allows you to play through the game without crashing and without doing horrible violence to the rules as written. But from a graphics and UI standpoint, it'll be fairly austere, and there may be instances where a rule isn't implemented accurately. But as long as the thing basically runs and more or less tracks the game, I will consider it to be a successful project, and then we'll move on to the next one. I'm not going to make the source code public without Nuts Publishing's express consent. I'm certainly not going to make the application itself public without their express consent. If they were to consent, then I would probably put the source code up on GitHub or some other public repository, but that's all strictly hypothetical at this point. Ultimately, this is a learning project for me and a stepping stone to bigger and better things. Currently, the application has not achieved what I would call functional prototype status yet. There'll probably be several crashes to desktop and assertion errors as I'm making this video. I may or may not try and conceal that fact. Anyway, as far as the project itself, my project, I've tried to partition my code into a rules engine layer and a UI layer. I've tried to minimize the use of any Qt framework code in the rules engine itself to maximize portability should I decide to migrate to a different UI framework like Unity or like Godot. There are certainly some Qt dependencies in the rules engine though. For example, Qt has a built-in signal slot capability, which is a decoupling pattern, sort of like the classic observer-listener pattern. So in some places in the rules engine, I make use of the signal slot architecture to communicate with the UI layer. Generally speaking, though, communication flows from the rules engine to the UI layer using the classic observer pattern classes, and information, or more accurately, user input, is transmitted from the UI layer to the rules engine layer using the so-called command pattern, which I'll talk about a little later. So at this juncture, I'll just give you, I'll show you UML diagram, which is probably erroneous in several respects, but this shows how the rules engine layer communicates to the UI layer with the command pattern. In the rules engine, the entity is the base class of everything that, you know, all of the military units, so suspects, insurgents, combined anti-armor teams, and squads and tank units. But the entity class inherits from the subject class, which, as you can see, maintains a list of observers. and has a notify method that it uses to send events to any objects observing it. So suspect, insurgent, unit, and cat all derive from entity and indirectly derived from subject. And you can see squad and M1 Abrams derive from unit, and then USMC squad and Iraqi intervention force squads also are subclasses of the generic squad class. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that a squad moves from one location to another. When that happens in the rules engine, the squad object creates an event, or a move squad event, and then calls its own, it passes this new event to its notify method, which then iterates through the list of anything that's observing that squad. And the notify method calls the on notify method in the observer. So generally speaking, something like a squad is going to have a unit item observing it. So just like there are suspect, insurgent, unit, and cat objects in the rules engine, in the UI layer, there are suspect item, insurgent item, unit item, cat item, all of which multiply inherit from QGraphics item and from observer. So in this hypothetical, if a squad changes from location A to location B, it instantiates a move squad object, which it passes to its notify method, which then notifies the unit item that has registered itself as an observer of that squad. And on receipt of the move squad event, the unit item updates its appearance, updates its position in the scene to the new location. So that's kind of the gist of how state changes are communicated from the rules engine to the UI. As far as communications from the UI to the rules engine, and of course those communications are predominantly user input, I use something called the command pattern, which, let's see, here's the Wikipedia page for command pattern. To quote Wikipedia again, the command pattern is a behavioral design pattern in which an object is used to encapsulate all information needed to perform an action or trigger an event at a later time. This information includes the method name, the object that owns the method, and values for the method parameters. So I can illustrate this with an example I gave on my blog for the Phantom Fury application. So a class named iCommand is the base class of all command objects, and we're talking about my application right now. When the player, via the UI, let's say, moves a squad from a courtyard location to a first floor location, the UI creates a move squad object containing the squad's ID and the destination location's ID, and passes that object to a global command history object. The command history object then calls the move squad object's execute method, which then in turn calls the squad's move method, which updates the state of the rules engine and may also have various follow-on effects. Command history then adds that move squad object, that command object, to its list of executed commands, and it maintains this list. And that allows the application to create a record of all of the player's actions in the game. You can use this to implement undo, redo functionality, although that can get complicated, and I'm not sure I'm going to use that in the Phantom Fury application. But another thing you can accomplish by storing all of the user's input in the form of command objects is that it allows you to save the game and reload it by just saving all of the commands to file, and then when you load the game, you just are essentially reloading all of the player's commands and re-executing them. And if you do this correctly, it restores the game. It essentially replays the game to date and restores it to the point where the user saved the game and exited. So that's a little bit of the design overview. We might as well just look at the application itself now. It's probably why you have been sitting here through the last 20 minutes of blathering. Let's fire up the old code editor. Okay, here we go. Incidentally, this is Qt Creator, which is the IDE that comes with the Qt framework. You don't actually have to use Qt Creator to to make Qt applications. I think I know there's a plugin for Visual Studio, for example, that you can use for Qt projects. So let's start the application. Obviously, this is the box cover from the game. The background image, it's the city of Fallujah, no surprise. It's taken from Google Maps. This central image here is the first edition box cover. Hopefully these buttons are self-explanatory. So let's start a new game. You can see you get this pop-up here. It defaults to the standard scenario. There's a historical variant scenario where I believe the game is shortened by 3 turns, but you have a somewhat accelerated reinforcement schedule. I think you get 2 M1A1 support units, and I believe you can take your battalion reinforcements or your battalion reserves for free. Or in any event, in the game, you can vary between 1 and 4 the number of additional fortified zones. Remember, the activation markers for zones go into the proverbial opaque container. And you can swap out between 1 and 4 regular activation zones for fortified zones, which are much, as the name suggests, are much more difficult to tackle. So let's just stick with 1. So here's the main display. We've got to acknowledge this first. There are some information pop-ups like this throughout the game, just to sort of a quasi-tutorial, just predominantly explaining how the user interface works, and you can of course select to suppress these boxes if you don't want to see them again, but otherwise they'll keep showing up at the appropriate times. So let's click out of that. This is the game log. As you might guess, it just keeps a running log of all the things that happened in the game. You can expand it to an extent. I think you can even drag it a little bit that way. If you want to filter out some of these messages, you can just double click anywhere and that'll bring up this little thing that allows you to, for example, if you don't want to see suspect placements, you can just untick that box and you won't see those messages anymore. Or if you want to see them again, you can see it. So you can do that. And to make this go away, you can just double click anywhere and voila, you're back. This box actually can be dragged onto a second monitor if you want. I'm dragging it onto my second monitor now. You'll just have to take my word for it. You can minimize it if you want, but let's bring it back for the time being. This is obviously the main map from the game. You can left click in most places and just drag to move it around. Right now it's zoomed out as much as possible, so that's you can see here it's scaled out at 0.517. That's the minimum amount of zoom. You can use the mouse wheel to zoom in, zoom out. If you zoom in, you have a little more freedom to drag it left and right, but once you've zoomed out to the maximum, it won't let you drag it to the left or right, just up and down, because otherwise you would be dragging it. So you'd be dragging the view outside of the edge of the scene. So let's just go over some of the user interface elements down here in the status bar. You can see the zoom level. For debug purposes, this is displaying the coordinates inside. If you remember, I said there's a QGraphics view class. I should say map view is a subclass of the QGraphics view class. So this middle value here is just the XY coordinates inside the view, as the name suggests, and the other set of values is the XY coordinates inside the scene, which are not necessarily the same as the view coordinates. Up here, I only have a few menu items implemented here. File just gives you some standard options like loading a saved game, saving the game under a different name, closing the game, or exiting the application entirely. The debug menu is just a few things for testing purposes, which this will not be as the name suggests, this would not be in a release version. You might notice that the file menu has this brownish background, just like the game log does. In Qt, you have some level of control over widget appearances using style sheets. There are other ways you can do it. Style sheets use a CSS type syntax. The toolbar, the reason that the toolbar is this seemingly out of place white color instead of this nice brownish color here, is that when you apply a style sheet, if you apply this very same style sheet to the toolbar, when you get these tooltip messages, the tooltip text is white, because you can see on the menu bar, the background is brown, but the text is white. However, when you apply the style sheet to the toolbar, the pop-up tooltips are basically unreadable because the text comes out white. So that's, one of those things as a programmer you have to figure out some workaround or some cure, some fix for that problem. Seems like you spend half your time tracking down little bugs or fighting the framework in that way. These buttons here are really, I debated whether or not to leave them in here for the video. These are really for the map authoring function in the application. There are some tools that allow you to actually create the user interface elements, the map elements. Like, for example, by toggling this, this shows the very so-called coordinates items that delineate the boundaries of zones and delineate like the positions of each of the locations in the zone. And you can, if you press this button again, you can actually show each coordinate item has its own unique ID number. In any event, you wouldn't normally see this in the game, but it's there. I was going to edit the program to remove these from the toolbar, but I figured I would just leave them in for the time being. This button, though, is most definitely used in play. This is used to advance to the next phase. Well, let me show a couple of other elements here. You can see right now the turn display is still basically turn 0, but this marker will be, the position of this marker will move around the turn clock automatically. You don't have to fuss with it yourself. Same thing with the victory point totals. As as victory points are gained or lost, the rules engine will send the appropriate event notifications to the UI layer, which will update the position of these victory point markers or the turn marker to hopefully accurately reflect the game state. And just these things are not even movable by the user. And why would you want to? One thing I did want to point out about the toolbar is that I made these images too small. I think these are 24 pixels by 24. If I were to redo this application, I would probably make these images, 36 by 36. And probably use scalable vector graphics so that they draw nicely at whatever level of resolution. But for the time being, these are just raster images and too small. I mentioned earlier that the VP markers and turn marker counters can't be moved by the player. That's true, I think, of all the pieces in the game. For example, your squads and your combined anti-armor teams, you can't move them directly. The support mission markers also can't be moved directly. The support mission markers are updated by the engine, but the squads themselves and the cats, I used a variation on the approach used in something like Vassal. In Vassal, if you click on a unit or a stack of units and drag it, you don't actually move the pieces directly. Instead, the Vassal creates kind of a semi-transparent proxy image of whatever it is that you want to move. And it's that proxy image that moves along with your mouse, and only when you release the mouse button does the proxy image disappear and the actual piece or pieces move to wherever you reposition them. I actually implemented that kind of interface modality in a separate standalone application, including like stacking functionality for pieces. And I'll probably use that in other projects going forward. But because Phantom Fury is a fairly simple game and simple in terms of the numbers and types of pieces, I didn't use that proxy display item approach. So we'll see what I did do a little bit later in this video. In any event, so when you start the game, the engine handles the activation of the starting 9 zones on the north or bottom edge of the map. And it also handles the placement of martyrs and guerrillas, and you can actually see all of this activity over here. This is all for the initial activations. As you know from the game, there are a total of 15 U.S. Marine Corps squads. You only have 9 of them available at the beginning of the game. The other 6 are deployed, are placed in these company and battalion reserve areas. The 9 squads that do start, you place them 1 per courtyard area in the 9 starting zones. And you also get 4 of these cat items you'll notice that there's this little area here with this blue shading. Internally in the application, I just call this the U.S. Marine Corps staging area. It doesn't have any direct counterpart in the game. It's just a temporary place to stick the squads as you're deploying them for your initial setup. This is actually another good place to talk about some of the headaches you face as a programmer. This staging area, this rectangle, is actually an instantiated object placed on the graphics scene, on the map scene. It draws its own bounding rectangle, and it fills the rectangle with this semi-transparent blue color. And it also draws, I don't know if you can see, we could zoom in a little bit, it draws these little squares for each of the individual piece areas. Notice that the cat items are darker than normal, and it's because for some reason this staging area object is being drawn on top of the cat items, but it's being drawn, as it should be, underneath the Marine Corps squads. I spent a whole bunch of time trying to track down why this problem is happening. I suspect that it's a drawing order problem, meaning that the order in which the map scene object draws or calls the paint methods on each of these graphics items subclasses it's doing it in an order that is not desirable. And I know that it's a drawing order problem because if I set the brush for the staging area object, if I set it to completely transparent, then the problem disappears. These cat items appear normally. But what's going on is that for some reason, the map scene is drawing the 4 cat items, then drawing the staging area rectangle on top of them, and then drawing the U.S. Marine Corps squads. And that's true even though I've taken some pains to make sure that the cat item objects are being added to the scene after the staging area item. That should have fixed the problem in terms of drawing order, but I guess not. So in any event, that's something that'll have to be tracked down later on. You notice also that the 3 Iraqi intervention force squads are in their own area, and you can't do anything with them right now. The 2 M1A1's Abrams support units are over here. Actually, you only get one of them in the standard scenario, so this second one will never activate. But in any event, these reinforcements, the U.S. Marine Corps reinforcements, aren't even available until turn 2. And the Iraqi squads are available only situationally. I think you have to capture a zone adjacent to or neighboring of the mosque. So in any event, let's show how you deploy the units. It's actually really simple. Click on a squad. You see this little arrow appears. It's mostly transparent until it's over a valid starting location, in which case the arrow turns a darker or more vibrant shade of blue. So if you release the mouse with the arrow over a valid location, boom. If you want to assign a cat item to a squad, you can't put it in its own place, but you can drop it on top of a squad and voila. Another thing to point out, as I said earlier, you can't move pieces independently. Like I can't physically manipulate this. I can move this squad and its associated cat item over to another zone, but I can't just move it arbitrarily around. But there is this pop-up display that shows you what's in a stack. If you ever decide that you want to reassign a cat to a different squad, again, because you can't like scroll through the stack or you can't move pieces around independently, well then how do you get at that cat team to drag it to a new squad? Well, what you do is you just hold down the C key and then drag it over, and you can put it back in its original area or assign it to a different squad like that. Now it's no longer there, it's part of this squad. And rather than make you sit through me deploying the entire 9 squads and cats, I'll just stop the application and we'll relaunch it, and I have a quasi script that automatically deploys the USMC right. Currently I have that commented out because it's only a temporary expedient to begin with. So we'll uncomment that piece of code. We'll rebuild and relaunch the application, which should go pretty quickly, one would hope. There we go. Start new game. And you can see it's automatically deployed just for testing purposes, automatically just deployed squads and cats to various zones. And just, to show you how it works again, if I really wanted to move this cat to a different squad, I could just click C, drag it, and boom. Another thing to point out is that pop-up display. You can see it doesn't always sit nicely on the map. It doesn't always draw properly. Sometimes it draws off screen. Another huge headache I had to deal with. It has to do with the fact that depending on what zoom level you're at, the markers themselves that are on the map are scaled, but the unit zoom display doesn't scale, and it has something to do with the arithmetic under the hood and the fact that some of this is scaled and some isn't. So my horizontal scaling logic isn't right, so that will have to be dealt with. One thing I wanted to point out is that this is the advance phase button, meaning when you're done with your current activities for the phase, you click this button and it moves the game to the next phase. You'll notice that it's enabled now, and that's because all of the squads and cats are deployed. But let's just say hypothetically we were to move this back to the staging area. Notice that the button is now disabled and doesn't work. So the game does look for and enforce things like you have to have all of your squad deployed in order to start the game. So now that we've deployed the squad again, the button is enabled, and as it says, press when you're finished deploying your squads and cats, and we're finished. So voila. We're now in the support phase. These little icons for the phase advance button actually are my own. I was almost going to say my own artwork, but I don't think this rises to the level of artwork. It's just functional graphics at best. So in the support phase, you've got three types of potential missions. You've got your FA-18 missions, your AH-1W, your Whiskey Cobra missions, and your Dragon Eye surveillance missions. In the game, the way you would execute one of these missions is, for example, if you wanted to do a Dragon Eye surveillance mission, you would just hold down the D key, and you can see that the application will highlight all eligible zones. So under the rules, you can conduct a Dragon Eye mission in 2 adjacent or neighboring zones. So if you hold the mouse over, let's just say zone 26, and then press the D key, it'll highlight all of the eligible zones. So if I were to click on zone 26, for example, now it gives me the option to, it tells me to select the second zone. I can cancel out of the mission if I want, or I can try it again. All right, let's also do our zone 16. Voila. So it activated these 2 zones. You can see that it placed in zone 17, I guess two suspects would have been placed. Only one of them turned out to be a real unit. It's a gorilla. In the neighboring zone, zone 16, is another gorilla's unit. And you can also see that the Dragon Eye marker incremented by 1 box. So we only have 1, 2, 3. We only have 3 missions, 3 Dragon Eye missions. If you wanted to also do a, let's say, an FA-18 mission, you could hold the F key down, right? And there's a limitation in that FA-18 missions cannot be conducted in a zone neighboring or adjacent to a friendly occupied zone. And since all of these zones down here are friendly occupied, none of these zones are eligible, for example, but zone 31 would be. Zone 30 isn't because it's neighboring. I keep saying zone 30. It's zone 20. Zone 20 is not eligible because it's neighboring zone 7. But for example, 38 is eligible. Well, you get the idea. And same thing for the H1W. Just hold down the A key. I don't think there are any. Oh no, there are now because we did this with the. We discovered this with the Dragon Eye mission. There's no point in conducting an AH1 mission in a zone with no enemy units. So if I hold it down over this zone, zone 15, it doesn't show as being eligible. But if you move it over to zone 16, it's now eligible. So let's just say we're done with the support phase. So this goes, now we'll go to the USMC reinforcements phase. Actually, you can't take any reinforcements on turn 1, so it's kind of a moot point. Now we go to the fire combat phase. I don't think any units are eligible because in order to be able to conduct fire combat, you have to be in a friendly controlled zone. and these zones will not change to friendly control until the reorganization phase, which is the last phase of turn 1. So no fire combat is possible this turn. You see it also just reinforces that by giving you the old forbidden cursor. Let's now move on to the movement phase. Movement is fairly simple. You just click on a unit, drag it. If the arrow is over someplace, a viable adjacent location, it turns blue. Boom. And I believe you might also get a tooltip. Yep, it even tells you, the tooltip tells you how many movement points you have remaining. Here you can't move there. You cannot move into a enemy occupied location, but here you can. Let's see. What I haven't implemented yet is multi-location movement. Right now you have to move somewhat laboriously one location at a time. So for example, if you drag this unit over to this location, which is 2 locations away from its current courtyard location, the application won't calculate, it won't ascertain that a viable path is available and won't do the navigation for you. That's the next step, is to do that sort of pathfinding. So unfortunately you have to do you have to move laboriously location by location. Let's finish up with the movement phase and go to the assault phase. Now, one of the shortcomings of the design as it stands right now is it gives very little feedback about actions. I mean, sure, events are logged in the event log, but so for example, let's say I want to conduct an assault. It's the same as for movement and fire combat. You just click on the squad. If there's a viable location to do the assault, you'll get that the arrow will turn a brighter shade of blue, and if you release it, boom. So you see the events here: squad 10, assault zone 3, floor 1, normal assault. Gives you the die rolls. The guerrilla retreats. So where did the guerrilla retreat to? It retreated across the street, I guess. Zone 15, rooftop. Yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. And so the squad occupied the targeted zone. Let's try an assault with this one. Now, because that squad has an assigned cat team, it could use explosives in the assault, but we'll say no. Boom. See, so there's very little in the way of feedback, there's no sound effects, there's no animations. Basically, you get the description in the log, and that's it. So what happened here? Squad 11 assaults the zone, rolled a 5, insurgents rolled a 6, the guerrilla retreats again. So sort of non-eventful. Let's try this one over here. Yeah, why not? Uh-oh. So the USMC squad has taken losses. This is a timed message box. It just it'll disappear by itself if you don't acknowledge it. That way you just don't get, the screen doesn't get cluttered up with old messages. But so it was a martyr. The martyr was eliminated. It was returned to the pool. The US gets loses 2 victory points for taking a step loss, but it does at least clear the location. Let's just say that we're done with the assault phase for now. Now we're in the reorganization phase. There's a number of activities. The reorganization phase is really on autopilot. There's a number of processes that occur, but they don't really require any user discretion, so it does it all for you. It reverted some of these, right? So for example, Zone 6 reverted to USMC control, Zone 4. Zone 2 also reverted. Zones that are adjacent to USMC or neighboring of USMC controlled zones are automatically activated by the engine. So you can see that these units are all placed here. These are all suspect markers. You can zoom in a little bit, get a better view. And just for fun, let's go to the next turn. Now we're back in the support phase. Okay, I think that'll do for now. In the hopefully not too distant future, I'll put up a more thorough playthrough of the game, but you've got the general idea, and I've been yammering on for 45 minutes now, so you're probably ready to strangle me. A few concluding thoughts. As I said earlier, my hope for this video and for my blog, and by the way, this is my blog here on Board Game Geek. I'll put a link in the YouTube video description. But my hope for the video and for the blog more generally is to stimulate more discussion of this topic. When I went online to try and find resources on how to code turn-based strategy style games, I really found virtually nothing. Not on YouTube, not on the internet more broadly. There are tons of tutorials for 3D type games or for arcade style games, even things like roguelikes, but virtually nothing for wargame style, tabletop style hex encounter or area movement war games. Obviously, it's a niche hobby, and I'm hoping to bring together like-minded, technically inclined people, or at least artistically inclined people, to talk shop, to be able to bounce ideas off of each other, maybe even collaborate on projects. You feel free to post your thoughts on my blog. There's also on Board Game Geek the Digital Wargame Development Guild, which, I mean, you could read the description for yourself, is exactly the kind of thing that I'd like to do. But unfortunately, you can see that there's just not a lot of activity on it, which is a shame. I mean, I understand, again, that this is a niche within a niche within a niche, but, there are, something like 8 billion people on the planet, many of whom speak English. So we should be able to assemble a few dozen people here to be able to talk about these things and maybe even collaborate. But anyway, thank you for sticking with me through this video, and one thing I do want to say is that even though I predicted that the game would crash to desktop one or more times during the recording of the video, it never did. In a separate run through of the application that I didn't record, I did find a crash to desktop bug, but I fixed that. But it was surprisingly stable, so I guess I can at least crow about that. Anyway, until next time, thanks for sitting in.